Hello, and welcome to another episode of Not D&D, which is brought to you by EN Live, part of EN World, the leading tabletop news and review site. I'm Jessica, your host, and furthering my redhead agenda, I have an excellent guest with me this week of Stephen Dewey. Stephen, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I had to put the redhead agenda on there because on Twitter you are the shifty ginger, which
Indeed.
I thought was fantastic. So I thought having the two of us here were like furthering some evil agenda we clearly all have.
It's too powerful. It's too much power in one place.
Exactly. But also, so thank you so much for coming on. So for people that aren't familiar with you and what you do, could you give us a little introduction about yourself and what you do at Cavalry Games?
Sure. So Cavalry Games is my self-publishing RPG imprint, RPG and potentially someday other games. That is the company that I sort of built back in 2015 to support the release of my flagship tabletop RPG 10 Candles. It hasn't grown too much beyond that in the several years since. I'm working on other stuff in the background, but it was really created as a publishing imprint for 10 Candles because I decided at the time I really wanted to not only do the designing aspects of game, but also the publishing aspects. So that's been where I've been basing all my designs out of for the past 7 years or so.
Fantastic. And 10 Candles is the game we're here to talk about this episode. So we will be getting into that to talk about it later. But before we get into that, with every guest, I always talk about your background and history with games and how you got to the place you are now. So my first question is, what was the first tabletop RPG you remember playing?
The first tabletop RPG I ever played was something that wasn't really anything published. It was my brother, my older brother at the time when I was much younger, like single digits, had exposure to Dungeons and Dragons. At the time, it was like 3rd edition, I think. And he decided to cobble some things together and run sort of a little mini game for me because I was very interested in it at the time.
Nice.
So that was my first ever experience. It was random and chaotic and didn't last more than a couple sessions, but that was enough for me to get hooked. And then eventually that led to my first sort of published RPG experience, which was at the time Dungeons and Dragons.
Amazing. So how did you go from somebody that just plays and enjoys games to somebody that makes them? What was that path like for you? Because I know a lot of people that watch this are interested in doing that themselves.
Well, it kind of came from 2 different avenues. One of which was that I quickly became someone who was much more interested in running games and telling stories than playing them. So I really committed very quickly to being the permanent dungeon master or game master in any group that I was playing. And I was really interested in those stories and in telling those stories, in facilitating them. So I began to get very intimately familiar with rules systems. And at the time, I only knew about D&D, but when eventually I sort of broke past that barrier and saw the wealth of indie games and story games that were out there, I began to become obsessed with those rule systems as well, and how so much could be done with so little. And that kind of catapulted me forward to wanting to see what other kinds of stories you could tell that weren't necessarily within the traditional framework.
Amazing. You sound like the opposite of me because I am, you know how you get forever GMs? I am the forever player. But interestingly enough, I was so excited to have you on to talk about 10 Candles because this is the game actually I want to run this game. And I am like a forever player. I've been playing for like a decade. I don't run games, but this one I was like, I could run this. So we're going to get into it and talk about it. Do you know what? I think I will. But we're going to talk about it now. So this game has had loads of accolades and awards. So you start off with Kickstarter back in like 2014, was it?
Yeah.
So a wee while ago, then since then you've had an Indie Groundbreaker Award, Indie RPG runner-up for the most innovative game, Golden Geek Award nominations that Ennies for Product of the Year, Best Rules, Best Electronic Book. So people quite like this game. So that must be pretty nice. Like, how did that feel doing the Kickstarter and then having people receive the game so well afterwards?
It was incredible because I'd never made an RPG before. I tried obviously to make one that I thought would be good and that people would
Yeah.
enjoy. But the initial Kickstarter, while being for me wildly successful, was nowhere near what I think people would traditionally consider to be a successful crowdfunding campaign. It was largely, a huge percentage of that were friends and family and people who knew me, and it started to get out there somewhere. And I'm horrible at, like, I'm not a marketer. I'm horrible at getting the word out there. So really 10 Candles needed to survive through word of mouth. It was the only way that game would spread. And it did in a way that I was never expecting it to.
Amazing.
It really hit a nerve where I tended to find that, a lot of the time, if you would sit down and play in a session of 10 Candles, for so many people, it was such a surprising experience and such an evocative experience that at least one person around that table is going to think, maybe I should run this, and get their own copy of it. And that's sort of how it spread. People wanted to share that experience with other people in a way that kind of, I guess, makes sense to me in retrospect, but at the time was very surprising. So, I actively was submitting it in that early year as best as I could to as many awards and things like that I could, just to try to get it out there. The response was incredible. I don't think it ever actually took home an award, but it got a lot of nominations. It got a lot of runner-up sort of honorable mentions. And for my first game, I can't complain. It was incredible.
Yeah, I mean, well, what you say about word of mouth is 100% how I heard about it as well. Because as I mentioned to you before, so many people that came on this show, I ask at the end if people have any recommendations for other indie games, and I had so many people recommend this game to me. So I was like, I have to check this out. So speaking about this game, if people watching aren't familiar with it, how would you describe this game to somebody? What's the elevator pitch for the game?
Sure. So in 10 Candles, it is a tragic horror storytelling game. You play a group of survivors that are trying to make the best of some apocalyptic scenario. It has a lot of default scenarios about the world going dark, the sun being gone, there's monsters in the darkness in the book, but it really shines as a toolbox for any kind of horror game that you want to tell. Significant things about this game is that it is actually played by the light of 10 tea light candles, as in the title of the game. And those candles function in a few different ways. They function as a countdown timer for the game, where every time that roll of the dice is failed, one of those candles will go out and the story will step one step closer to its conclusion. They also help to ramp up the tension of the game, because every candle that goes out, the scenes get a little bit harder, a little bit shorter. It's more complicated for the players to succeed. And it's much more likely that dangerous or terrifying things will happen with them. They're also used very practically. Obviously, exercise caution whenever around open flames, but in an ideal play session, you're also using them to literally burn away your character as you play, where parts of your character sheet, the index cards that you've built them on, are going to literally go up in flames as your characters use up their resources and use up their second chances. But the most important part of those candles is that eventually they're going to burn out. And when only one candle is left, you enter the final scene of the game, in which the tragic horror aspect of the game comes to fruition, because this is not a survival horror game where your characters might survive or might die. They are all going to die in that final scene of play. And everyone knows that going in. So
Yeah.
it's not a surprise. It's a pre-negotiated story about these characters in the final hours that they are alive. And it facilitates your ability to tell much more intense stories because you know how it's going to end. It's a much more collaborative storytelling effort between the game master and the players, because it's not kind of competitive where the players are trying to have their characters survive and trying to beat the GM or outsmart them. Instead, you're all kind of working together because the only way you win is by just telling a really cool story together about these people. We want to build them up so that we can break them down.
Yeah, I mean, this game sounds so great because I think what you were we're going to get into more detail about it, but the way you describe it's collaborative storytelling. I think for any GM or player, playing this game will help you in other games that you play, because I think it's gonna make you think about role playing in a slightly different way and be like, oh yeah, I hadn't considered that, or things like that. So I think this is a great game to play, and this is designed to be a one shot, so it's just played over 2 to 4 hours. And as you say, hugely replayable though, because you could do so many different scenarios. And because it's a collaborative with the players there, if you get a different group of people, I imagine you have such a different game.
Absolutely, yeah.
So diving into the game, into the detail a bit more. So I love the way character creation's done in this game. Could you just talk us through how people make their characters?
Yeah, so you build your characters on a stack of the aforementioned index cards. You've got these index cards. They contain everything there is to know about your character, which isn't a lot. We don't need to know a ton about them. We don't need to have a really incredibly detailed backstory for these characters.
Sure.
As you said, we're going to be playing with them for a couple of hours. But in that, there are different stages of creating these characters and different aspects to them. So first off, you have their traits, you have their virtue and their vice. So a virtue is the positive trait, the vice is the negative trait. This is some, 1 or 2 word aspect about their personality. Virtues, that's something about them or something that they have or something that they know that's going to help solve problems, whereas the vice might create problems. It's some negative attribute, something they're ashamed of, something they're addicted to. You've got both of these things will help you in the same mechanical way, but by utilizing both of them, we're going to sort of see the positive and negative of this character. You also have your moment. Your moment is an event. You're sort of pre-writing a scene or an event that will happen over the course of the game, during which your character may have the possibility of finding hope in the darkness. So your moment might read something like, I will find hope when I find my sister, or I will find hope when I kill one of the monsters, whatever it might be. And it's an opportunity that we put on the table. Moments are really cool because it's one of the things in the rules that allows for 10 Candles to be a zero prep game. It's really designed so that players, GMs don't design or don't have to work to design a big module ahead of time. Moments are sort of your keystone moments over the course of that 2 to 4 hour gameplay time. They're already mapped out. Those heartfelt or really intense character moments, the players are already writing them down, and they'll have the opportunity to sort of try and roll some dice when that moment comes up, and potentially be rewarded or punished depending on how that roll goes. And then the final piece is what's called the brink. The brink is sort of a secret trait, and it's not really who your character is. It's more what your character is capable of when pushed to the brink. So a brink is something sort of darker. It shows the darker, more stressed out or panicked or last resort side of your character, and what they might be capable of. And when that's used, it can come, again, with a really big mechanical benefit or a really big mechanical downfall, depending on how it's engaged with by your character. One of the things about character creation that's really fun is that your traits are not actually written by you for yourself. Your traits are written by the people sitting next to you. And whoever writes your vice for you is also going to be the person who writes your brink for you. And it is that their character actually knows that your character is capable of that. They know some secret that you are holding back about who you really are or what you can really become. And when players are all writing the brinks for each other, one of the players will also write the brink for the monsters. They'll write the GM's brink. They know what the monsters are capable of, and they're the only one who knows that. And the GM will write a brink for the player sitting to their left. The monsters know what this player is capable of, but none of the other characters around the table do. So it bakes in some secrets right from the get-go. It bakes in some relationships between these characters as you generate who they are and what they're going to be doing over the course of the game.
That's amazing. How long did it take to kind of that to come out in kind of playtesting? Was that an idea you had from the beginning, or did it evolve through playtesting, creating characters that way? What was that process like?
It very much did evolve. Character creation was one of those things that started way more complicated than it is now. I think, if I'm thinking back, I believe the earliest iteration of character creation was actually that everyone would write a couple of traits and put them in a big pile, and then the GM would actually auction the traits off, and people could bid a number of like matches they had to buy the traits for their character. It's a really fun idea. I will undoubtedly reuse it eventually, but this just wasn't the game for that. It didn't really make sense with the theme of the game. So I eventually just made it a lot more easy, a lot more streamlined. There were a lot of ideas like that that eventually just didn't fit with the theme and got tossed to make it as streamlined as it is right now. Really, that's what playtesting did for me. It cut out a lot of unnecessary parts of the game, so it could just really focus on what was important for the theme and for making the rules work.
You had to kill your darlings. That was the thing. I mean, I think the simplicity of this game is what people talk about. They use the word elegant a lot. So I think cutting out things is definitely the way to go. And I think for a lot of other people, designing definitely something to look at, because I think the temptation is to do loads of fun stuff and put in loads of fun ideas, but sometimes just paring it back and keeping it small and elegant can make something really fantastic.
One of the award nominations that 10 Candles received that I'm most proud of was for the Ennies the year I published it, for best rules. And I was so happy, because that was what the component of the game that I was most proud of, was making these rules that were tied in intricately with the theme. So there was this harmony between how the rules worked and what the themes were, while also keeping them light and simple enough that they did do work. It's not really what I would call a super rules light system. There are rules there, and some of them can be kind of complicated, but once you've got it on lock, they just disappear. They do what they need to do, and then they get out of the way immediately.
Yeah, I think that definitely works. And like you say, the best rules, I think, as a game designer is, that's the award you want, isn't it? Because that's what you're doing with it. So we've touched on character creation there, and I'm going to come back to when we talk about mechanically how we burn those cards in the game, because that's very fun. But could we talk about this kind of structure of the game? Because you mentioned the 10 Candles kind of structure the pace of the game and kind of the scenes. So if we could talk about like how scene works and how you structure the game.
Yeah, so the basic mechanics that the game revolves around is a communal pool of dice that is shared by the players. So at the start of the game, the players have a big pool of 10 dice, 10 candles, 10 dice. They're all 6-sided dice. And whenever the players need to make a conflict roll, they will take all of those dice and roll them. And that can be for if the action that they're trying to undertake requires skill or luck or just has an unknown outcome. And that unknown outcome is intended to be fairly broad. Again, this is a zero prep game. So if the GM doesn't already have an idea for what's in the safe or what's going to happen when the players knock on the door to this mysterious house, they don't need to know. They can just have the players roll a conflict roll, even though that it isn't challenging to knock on the door to a house, but it has an unknown outcome. So the players will take up their dice and they'll roll them. As long as they get at least 1 6, they're successful. And if they get more 6s than the GM, they will also get to narrate exactly what happens as a result of the conflict. So at the beginning of the game, the GM has no dice. The players have this big pool of 10 dice. So they're going to be succeeding and they're going to be narrating most of the time. If they roll any 1s, those 1s are removed from the die pool. They're set aside. And they'll stay set aside for the rest of the scene. So this communal die pool will begin to shrink until eventually someone fails a roll. At that point, the roll has failed. The GM will narrate some grisly or horrible thing that happens as a result, and we will darken a candle. When the candle darkens, we move forward to the next scene. And each scene is just played like you would any tabletop role-playing game. The GM's describing the world, the players are interacting with it. But when that scene ends and the candle is darkened, we enter sort of this transitionary period between the scenes called establishing truths. And this is what I tried to model this after, like horror movies, where, you know, it's not just one single cut most of the time. You're jumping forward in time and in circumstances between these scenes. So the establishing truth scenes, that is when the players kind of get to go around the table and they get to say a thing that is now true about the world or about their story. Maybe they've jumped forward in time, they found equipment, circumstances have changed a little bit. Sometimes establishing truths can happen right when an action scene kicks off. Maybe the players just want to move past it, or maybe each of these things that they establish as truth is like a bullet time sequence of the fight. You know, whatever they want to do with it, they can do with it. They go around, they establish a number of truths equal to the number of lit candles, and then we move on to the next scene, where the die pool will get refilled, but now only up to 9 candles, for example. 9 candles, 9 dice. If every time we darken a candle, one of those dice goes into the hands of the GM instead. So now whenever the players roll, the GM will also be rolling. And again, it's not to succeed or beat them. They'll always succeed with a roll of a 6. But now it's to challenge them for their narrative control over the story. So at the beginning of the game, you've got these longer scenes. The players are succeeding at everything. Their characters are powerful and accomplished, and they're getting to narrate exactly what happens, getting to show off these characters. But as the game goes on, as things get dangerous, more and more of those dice go over to the GM. And that includes their power, their abilities to succeed at rolls. The length of the scenes begins to shorten. Things get more dangerous. Even the literal power over the story slowly slips from the hands of the players over to the GM.
So that has like an impending doom sense of desperation, and that works mechanically, but also just thematically as well. So that's...
it's very much not meant to be like, you know, there are some amazing survival horror tabletop RPGs out there that have, you know, like Dread by Epidiah Ravachol is a great example of like the classic survival horror. And that is a survival horror game, just like you'd see in a movie, right? You have these moments where you're very calm and relaxed. And then you have these moments of really intense stress as you're pulling from the Jenga tower that game requires you to play with, and potentially jump scares as that Jenga tower crashes to the ground and one of the characters meets their end. 10 Candles isn't that. Like, it doesn't really have jump scares. It doesn't have those sudden spiked moments of anxiety like you would expect from survival horror. Instead, it has this really slow, creeping buildup of stress and intensity as the game goes. As the candles darken, you have less light in the room. Everyone's scooting closer to the desk so they can see the candles. It really tries to build up that slow build over the course of several hours. So that's very much intended.
I mean, it sounds great. I'm very excited to run this game. So like I say, I'm very much a forever player, but this game I was like, I could definitely run this, because exactly what you said about it being not having a whole load of prep. You're going to be there creating your story as you go with your players. So I think that makes it feel so much less intimidating for somebody who perhaps hasn't played a lot of games. So that's definitely an appeal for me. So talking about the games, you're going through, seeing the scenes, it's getting darker, you're getting less dice. There is the last scene that we've spoken about, and we know we're all going to die in the game. It's not me predicting the future, but maybe. Anyway, but in the game. And the last scene. So could you talk about the last stand and how we structure that kind of mechanically?
Sure. So the ending of a game of 10 Candles is critical. And I even say in the book that this is the most important part of the game. And the way that the ending works and why the ending works actually requires that we go back to how the game starts, which is with a recording being made. At the beginning of the game, the players are tasked to leave their final recording, which you can do on a cell phone or really any recording device that you have, but you're passing around that recording device to everyone sitting at the table, and everyone's recording their final message, their quintessential, I don't know if anyone's going to ever hear this, but this is my name, this is who I am, this is what we're trying to do. And they just pass that around the table. Everyone makes that quick recording. And those are the first words you ever speak as your character. It just throws you in. You got to give this character their voice. You have to say, what is important to them and summarize it up in a few seconds. And now we're going to dive into the first scene. At the very end of the game, when only one candle is left, that begins the last stand. At that point, the players have one six-sided die, possibly two, depending on if they were actually able to gain hope through their moment at some point in the game. But usually they'll just have that one die. And we are sort of collaboratively narrating this final scene. Everyone knows that they are going to die here in this final scene. And we go through that with conflicts coming up as they would normally. The problem here is that if you fail your conflict, which is very likely in that final scene, statistically, instead of just the scene ending, your character dies. And this is the one failed role in the rules where it is up to the player to narrate how that happens for their character, what they want that last moment to be like. And that last scene will continue going until either all of the characters have died or that last candle finally sputters out all on its own, at which point all of the characters are dead and you are sitting in silence. And after reiterating one of the ritual phrases of the game, these things are true, the world is dark, the GM would play that recording that's made at the very beginning of the game. And everyone just sits back in that silence, listening to the very first words that they've spoken as their characters in that final moment. And that is the end of the game. You have that flashback to the beginning, and then they are no more. And you flip on the lights, and everyone takes a deep breath and maybe cries a little bit, and you move on.
And you move on, have your cathartic moment. That's the bit of the game that grabbed me so much when I was researching it, ready to chat to you about it. Because I think that makes it a group shared experience. And I think those recordings are really nice, almost come down from the scene, just to take you, just to bring it full circle, give you a moment to kind of step back before you kind of come out of character. Because I imagine, it's a horror game, so you could have some really extreme kind of things in there. So on that note as well, talking about it with every horror game, like safety mechanics and things are very important. What kind of recommendations and advice do you have for people, to play this game safely?
Well, it's very important with any role-playing game, especially with horror or with any kind of game you think will have serious or adult themes. But really, cannot stress this enough, any role-playing game.
Yes.
It's important to have safety mechanics in place. So some of the ones that I use, lines and veils, which I don't know who originally came up with that one, but this idea of like, we're going to talk about what are some things that we'd like to occlude, some things that we'd like to maybe fade to black on, and some things that are really hard lines of this is content that we don't want in our game. And to have that be known, have that be written down, have that be agreed to by everyone. I think the X card is really important, which will allow, just having an index card on the table with a big X on it. People can point to it, say X card, tap it whenever there's a scene that they'd like to either back out of or, cancel or move on and talk about something else, anything that comes up that they may not be comfortable with. I think making it clear to the players that they are more important than the game, because that should always be the case. Like, the door is always open. People can leave if they need to. Player safety is always more important than the game, and they should, be the stewards of their own safety and be the stewards of each other's safety. And then a really nice set of safety tools is Script Change by Bo Sheldon, which I didn't know a lot about a while ago, but I've been looking into more recently. And I think it's more of a toolbox of safety mechanics and also for engaging with scenes in different ways. Like, if something needs to be, it kind of uses like a VCR analog to be like, do we want to go back? Do we want to go faster? Do we want to go slower on this scene? Like, is this good? Is this bad? How do we want to engage with it? All with, again, a pretty simple analog to like just point to certain things and not interrupt the flow of play too much. There are so many amazing safety tools out there. Just look for them, talk about them with your group, make sure everyone's bought in. It is, and I always like to say this when I talk about safety tools, because despite the fact that they're just clearly so valuable, there's always some people out there that think, well, I don't want to censor my gameplay. I don't want to be censored. Yeah. I just want to role play. I just want to have fun and not worry about that. And I have to stress so much that safety tools do the exact opposite of what you think they do. Because if there are safety tools on the table and everyone at the table knows they're there, has agreed to them, and is on board with how they work and is willing to use them, all of that, what that allows you to do is go so much harder, because you know there's a safety net there. You know that, like, if I push too hard, someone has an out, like we have an out. And it lets you really lean into those scenes and allow yourself to get more immersed than you ever might normally, because you're never really sure, is this too far? Is this too much? Are they going to be mad at me? This solves that. This lets you go deep into it, because you're playing with safety equipment and no one's going to get hurt, or at least there are tools in place to help prevent that. So safety tools are just great. I can't sing their praises enough.
Yeah, I feel the same as well. Before I go into when I first started playing tabletop RPGs, I started with indie games. So I was doing some games that had some kind of darker themes or horror. So I was so used to doing safety. And then I started playing DnD and things like that, like 5 or 6 years after I've been playing that. So when I first came to my first D&D game, I was like, okay, so what lines and veils do we have? And everyone looks at me like I had 3 heads. Because they're like, well, we're just going to go and kill the goblins. Why would these things come up? But I think it's important, even those games, because it could be something as simple as someone has a fear of spiders. And you could so easily put spiders as your monster in your D&D game. But if you know someone's really scared of them and it's going to give them a bad time, just put a different one in. So, I completely agree with you. But coming back to kind of horror games. So obviously when you're setting up your game. This is just me asking for me because I'm going to be running this game at some point.
Yeah.
So as well as safety mechanics, what advice do you have for GMs that are going to run this game, perhaps if they've not really run many tabletop RPGs before?
So advice for running 10 Candles. And I do think, by the way, that 10 Candles is a great game to run if you don't have a ton of experience running games, because it really does. It really puts so much of the power in the hands of your players. They, through the establishing truths, through building their characters, they're going to tell you, through their moments, they're going to tell you exactly what they want and what they're interested in through the game. So the first piece of advice is just keep your ears open and listen. Make sure those moments are cool. Make sure that, like, if they're using their establishing truths to skip past a scene or to implement things that are dangerous, grab onto those. They're giving you a gift that you can then use and incorporate because already know they're interested in it. One of the other things that I would say is one of the big, I guess not necessarily complaints, but one of the biggest questions I get is about pacing in this game. Because now there is some natural pacing in place, because if candles go out, they go out. If you're playing with real candles and they darken over time, they go out, and that's considered part of the game.
Okay, so somebody accidentally blows one out or something, it's done?
It's out, scene ends immediately, you move on. Yeah, so that is just another component of the game that is meant to breed just like some mild amount of anxiety. Where people are nervous about the fragility of the flames on those candles. Also,
and they're very light in the game.
Yes. Tea lights do this amazing thing as well, at certain brands at least, where all of the wax in the candle will basically melt and it will just appear to be clear wax. Like if you're using white tea light candles, where it's hard to tell how much wax is left in those candles because it's transparent, which is really fun.
Okay.
But so regarding pacing, one of the things I hear a lot is like, oh, well, our first scene took like 2 hours, and then the second scene was over in took another 45 minutes, and the first 3 scenes took forever, and then I had no time for the rest of the scenes because all the candles went out. I hear this a lot. So it has made it into my advice, which is to say, the GM has way more control in this game than a lot of other games over timing and pacing. If you think that things are taking too long, there are a lot of ways that you can change that. And the main thing you can do so let's talk first about speeding up pacing. To speed up pacing, you just need to throw more conflicts at your players. So throw something at them that you have no idea about. Throw them a broken down car on the side of the road, or a house with one lit little candle flickering in an upstairs window. Something that's going to stop them and make them want to kind of engage with it. From there, you have a host of different conflicts you can throw at them. Okay, the car's locked. Well, how do you want to get in? Break a window, roll a conflict. Pick the lock, roll a conflict. Okay, you get in. All right, you're checking under the seats for anything, roll a conflict. You want to see if there's gas in the tank, roll a conflict. There's you look in the back seat, there's a big duffel bag there. Or there's a locked tote. You want to break in, it's a conflict, right? So you can get a bunch of, house, same thing. Knock on the door, conflict. Open a door, conflict. All of these things. One of the ones that I really like to do if I really want to end a scene is have something happen that requires a conflict from everyone at the table. Probably shouldn't throw in more than 1 or 2 of these in a session, but if something's in the road and their car flips, or the bridge is breaking, or something, they need to get away from something dangerous, you can say, I need a conflict from everyone one at a time. And that die pool is going to shrink dramatically over the course of it. So whenever you need to speed things up, just throw more conflicts at them. If you need to slow things down, keep in mind that you never need to call for a conflict in this game. It's always up to the storyteller. So if you want to slow it down, call for less conflicts. If you're, oh yeah, there's a car on the side of the road, you open the door, then you just tell them what's inside. You open this, you tell them what's inside. As long as you can sort of improv what it is, you can make scenes last as long as you want them to by just narrating whatever it is the players would have, kind of like in a more traditional game. They're looking at a thing, you're just saying what it is. They're opening the safe, you're saying what's inside, and you can save the conflicts for when you're ready to move the scene forward. That's especially important when you get down to very few dice. If you're at like 2 or 3 or 4 dice, those scenes go quick. So you can be a little bit more, slow with conflicts that you assign out. Or if like one player is doing everything, you can like give them a couple of conflicts, but then sort of pull back and wait for some other players so everyone gets to roll some stuff. And that sort of folds into the third thing that I recommend, which is the third and final recommendation I'll give you, which is really try to get everyone rolling dice whenever you can. Because one of the other things that can sometimes happen in this game is that players don't use their cards quickly enough in the game and don't actually get a chance to go through their entire stack of cards. So they'll be like, at the end of the game, they're like, I never even got down to my moment to use it, because you kind of have to sequentially order the cards in the order that you want to go through them. So even like if a player succeeds at a conflict roll, but you see that they're going to lose some dice because there's some ones that have been rolled, always make sure to mention, like, you can succeed at the roll, but if you'd like, you can try to save these ones for the die pool if you want to use your trait. Like, always recommend, hey, don't forget about your trait. You could use it to save these ones, even though you don't need to. You could, and just encourage them to make use of their cards, to make use of their character abilities, to when they get to their moment, try to bring up their moment relatively quickly so they can have that good scene. And then by the end of the game, everyone's gotten down to their brink, which is the exciting one that they all want to get to, and get to play around with that. And that, again, it comes down to pacing. You don't want them to work through their deck too quickly, so you want to kind of spread those rolls around, keep an eye on maybe who's going through quickly. As long as you're just on the lookout for how your players are doing, how their stacks are looking, how long the scenes are lasting, you can kind of keep a really close watch on the pacing of the game and make it exactly what you want it to be.
That's some fantastic advice, because I think as a GM, generally for me, one of my fears is pacing so much, especially for a one shot, because we've got this evening to do it. You've got your friends together to kind of do it then and there. It's not like you can go, we'll just do that next week and get to it. So that was really good advice. Thank you. Yeah. Another thing about kind of setting up to play the game is obviously the setting. If you're sitting around a table with people with the candles, and that creates the scene so much. But a lot of people, because of the pandemic and because of varying logistic reasons, tend to play RPGs online. Have you found anyone's found a way to play this online well that kind of works, or is it very much in person? Yeah, I don't know. As
the 10 Candles subreddit will tell you, you can't play it online. It's impossible. It is possible, but people have correctly identified that you do tragically lose some of what many people would consider the spark of the game. To play it digitally. I've played it digitally and I've had a ton of fun. I know a lot of people have. I don't think that it is ruined or anything like that by playing it online. I still think that you can have fun with it. You obviously need to modify a few things here and there, like, does everyone have candles, or does just the GM have candles? Or, are we're all going to do our own recordings on our own devices and then play them in order at the end? So you kind of have to pre-negotiate some of this stuff, but I feel like it's still fully doable. It obviously works best when individual players can arrange their own play space in a way that they're not going to have a lot of distractions. They can maybe, they can shut off the lights when they're playing, so they're still kind of immersed in the dark. All of that stuff is still, definitely recommended. You might lose some of the magic, but not enough, in my opinion, to completely just not play it online. I think it's very doable.
That's always good to hear. So kind of talking about the game, we've gone through it in quite a bit of detail. Is there anything you want to share about the game that I haven't asked you, or something you want to mention before we kind of move on with other questions? Or
well, one of the things that I guess I sort of briefly mentioned before is that it does 10 Candles does have sort of a built-in setting, right? It's this idea of 10 days ago the world went dark, 5 days ago they came, whatever the monsters might be in any given session. And as you mentioned before, there is replayability, even though it's meant for one game session. Every time you play, you're going to be different characters, different circumstances, and the monsters will be different in some way. There are built into the rule book, there are a number of modules, sort of quick start modules in the back of the book that I honestly think are great for just like, you don't need more than what's written there. Just like a couple paragraphs. It's very easy to write your own modules if you have, if you want to play maybe based on local landmarks for wherever you're playing, or something that makes sense for, your life or for the lives of your players that makes sense to them. But one thing that I do really like to mention is that this game, one of the things about 10 Candles that I'm really proud of and why I mention it is because it does work as a toolbox for any kind of horror game you want to tell, as long as it ends the same way. As long as it is going to end with all of these characters dying, you can throw the default setting in the book right out the window and play any kind of game that you want to. Like, one of the modules in the back is, the world's not dark. You're just, college kids going on summer break. And it's like a slasher flick, cabin in the woods style, murder mystery. One of the ones that I've recently played that I had so much fun with was the players were all taking on the role of a group of, Power Ranger, Marvel style superheroes that were going off to fight what we knew would be their final battle, but maybe they could save the world first. Right. So anything that ends tragically, like with those characters dying, you can layer that on top of any kind of story you want to tell. If you as a GM really want it to be an alien invasion or zombie game, like, all you're doing is taking out the piece maybe that a player decides what the monsters are, or you modify it a little bit, and everything else is just like, yep, we're playing alien invasion, we're playing, whatever this might be. It's always going to end the same way, but the actual module that is the jumping off point for your characters can be anything you want it to be. It's a very versatile rule system, and sometimes, continually when people come and share some of the absolutely off the wall ideas that they've run for their groups with 10 Candles, it always makes my heart very full, because that's amazing. What, that's really digging into what the game can be.
Do you have any kind of favorite examples of any weird scenarios that you've been presented with for settings?
Well, one of the ones that I often will tell people about is where the players were a group of fair weather cultists. Like, they were friendly, like suburban, like parents who joined this local cult that was all about summoning the great darkness and the end of the world, but really it was just like a garden club, and they all
get out the house,
hang out to get out the house, like to just have fun. And they were, and they're going through the motions at one of their, doing this ritual, and then the sun darkens and they have to reckon with the fact that they just brought about the end of the world somehow, and maybe fix it, like. And it was just a comedy of errors, this game. But it just goes to show you can play sort of anything.
Amazing. Thanks so much for sharing that. So if you have heard us talking about 10 Candles, and like me, you're instantly sold and want to play this yourself, where's the best way for people to purchase this game?
Yeah, you can find 10 Candles and various other things I've worked on at cavalrygames.com. You can find my website there. You can just go right in. You can pick up 10 Candles in either a PDF, a soft cover, or a bundle of both. That's where you can find it.
Perfect. And if you're listening to the podcast, that'll be linked in the show notes there. So you can just go click on that and purchase the game, because the best way to support indie tabletop RPG creators is to buy their stuff. So we've gone through a lot of questions, but people have a burning question they want to ask you. Is like Twitter a good place to catch you to ask any questions about the game, or where's best to find you on the internet to quiz you about this?
Yeah, so there are sort of three avenues that are best to get in touch with me. One is definitely through Twitter at Shifty Ginger. One of which is through my Patreon. You can find me at patreon.com/Stephen Dewey. And that's where I bring in a lot of people who have enjoyed 10 Candles and want to support the game, have been supporting me there, which has been amazing. And then the last place to find me quite a bit frequently has been on Twitch. So you can find me at twitch.tv/Stephen Dewey, where I do occasionally have like RPG design sessions that I broadcast between various other things. So if you want to see how the sausage gets made, I guess you can tune in and watch some of those, or watch me play a variety of games with my friends. You can find me there as well.
Amazing. And again, if you listen to the podcast, links are in the show note. And if you're watching, you've probably seen them on the screen here. Fantastic. So my last question for you, Stephen, that I ask everyone is, do you have any tabletop RPGs you would recommend that are not ones you've made and that are not D&D?
Sure. So to give my sort of top three right now, and these are subject to change any week. So
yeah, I won't hold you to it. For today. Yeah.
So one that I have, I'm sure many of these may have already been mentioned. You might have even interviewed the designers. I don't know. We'll find out. But one of them is Alice is Missing by Spencer Stark, which I had the opportunity to play pretty recently. I'm already in the process of setting up another game of it. Spencer is amazing. We've talked a lot online. He has informed me that some parts of Alice is Missing were inspired by 10 Candles, like the use of a recording. So Alice is Missing also uses player recordings that are done at the start of the game and then played again at the end of the game. But it's an amazing game about a group of high schoolers, and their friend Alice has gone missing, has been reported as missing. And it plays in 90 minutes. It is a silent role-playing game where you're just communicating over text message with the other players in a group text and individual texts, as sort of the secrets of these characters and the secret of what happened to Alice all come out over the course of an hour and a half. It's amazing and highly recommended. One of my favorite games of all time that is sort of always living in my head rent-free is a game called Damn the Man, Save the Music by Hannah Schaefer. Damn the Man, Save the Music is about a group of employees at a record store and a last-ditch effort to save the record store that they love. So you play this sort of very ragtag group of I think the game describes like underachievers, overachievers, street philosophers, and love-struck artists that are all coming together to rescue their local record store.
Amazing.
And it's just very good and highly recommended. Stick it to the man, save the music store. It's a really great, again, one-shot tabletop RPG about banding together and saving this thing you love. And like, what's better than that? And then the third one I'll mention is one that I'm actively playing, a pretty long-standing but very emotional, very intense campaign of right now, which is Fall of Magic by Ross Cowman. This is a game many people have probably heard about, but it is played on a map that is slowly revealed as the game goes on. You play as sort of friends or companions or followers of a magus or magus, who is one of the last people in the world who can use magic. And you are going on a pilgrimage across the world to Umbra, the place where magic was born, because magic is dying and the magus is dying along with it. And it's again, like a very sort of simple and straightforward game. You're building it just off of scene prompts and a beautifully illustrated map as you're exploring it together. And it is a game that evokes, these emotions of awe and excitement and not knowing what's coming next, with these really, really great prompts to guide role play. No two games will ever be the same. It's just absolutely a beautiful and perfect game. And I've been playing an ongoing campaign of it for several months now, where we play, pretty infrequently, but the story has been, overwhelmingly good. So that's definitely another game I'd recommend.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. There are 3 great recommendations there, and possibly people that I will definitely have to get on the show, and some people I've already contacted to be on the show. So keep an eye out for them. So Stephen, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your game with us. I'm very excited to run my first game of 10 Candles, and if you're listening or watching, you can go to Cavalry Games, so you can do the same thing too. So we will be back with Not D&D next week, live streaming on Monday, wherever you've watched this, and of course you can always catch up on the podcast at Not D&D wherever you are listening to this. And with that, I think that brings us to the end. So Stephen, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.